Good afternoon, everybody.
I only got to share, yeah.
I hope you're enjoying the fantastic programme of events already at the World Anti-Bullying Forum. My name is Maureen King, and I'm here to facilitate a conversation today around healthy online behaviour. I suppose just very quickly about me. Well, first of all, I'm a very proud mother of two sons, Graham and Ed. I think Graham is somewhere in the audience there. And I suppose my sons grew up in the digital world, and we're living in a digital age. And for over 25 years, my advocacy has centred around safe and secure societies, and my strong advocacy is, I suppose, online safety for children. And that's very important to all of the panellists that are here this afternoon to have a conversation with you. So why is this important? Well, it's important because we live in a digital world. We are all digitally connected. We are all digital citizens. And I suppose with that comes challenges, and challenges for children, challenges for parents, challenges for people who are operating in this environment. And what our research has told us is that parents are feeling left behind with the advances in technology, and they're not able really to, I suppose, have that conversation with their children, and they need more support in that area. Dr. Tim Smith, a brain development expert from London, said that parents were being bombarded with conflicting advice, which could be confusing. So we're going to share some research with you today. And some of that research talks about there's been a 14% increase in parents who basically, on speaking with their children, are really having a difficulty in having that online conversation. And 75% of them didn't intervene in children's online activity because they were fearful. They didn't really understand the technology, there were privacy concerns, and they really were uncertain about how to tackle the problems. So today, Vodafone and the Anti-Bullying Centre have brought together an expert panel to basically share their insights and their research, and for us to have that conversation on what healthy online behaviour looks like. So now I would like to introduce you to the panel, and our youth ambassador here is Iman Isser, and she's the youth ambassador for Webwise. Dr. Geoffrey Shannon, who's here behind us here with the red tie on him. And Geoffrey is the Special Rapporteur for the Government on Child Protection. Beside Geoffrey, we have Liam O'Brien, who's the Director of Strategy and External Affairs, and who is also the Chair of the Vodafone Foundation. John Church, who is over here, looking very dapper in his white shirt and navy jacket. John is the CEO of the ISPCC, who provide Childline, which is Ireland's 24-hour national listening service. Helena Murphy, to my right here. Helena is a doctoral researcher with the National Anti-Bullying Research Centre. And Helena is an expert in bullying and benefits of empathic behaviour. And lastly, we have a very passionate researcher down the end in red, Karen Hand, and who is also a social psychologist. So I think if we're going to have this conversation about healthy online behaviour, I suppose we talk a lot about online and we talk a lot about cyberbullying. So maybe, Helena, you might just talk to us about what is cyberbullying?
Okay, well, cyberbullying is like traditional bullying, which is any bullying that's offline. So cyberbullying is bullying that's online. So the definition for traditional bullying, or bullying that's offline, is repetition, intention to do harm, and power, an imbalance of power. So cyberbullying is more or less the same, except that repetition isn't so necessary. You can say something online once, and the repetition comes with the amount of views or likes or forwards that gets. Basically, the amount of people that would see those negative, hurtful comments. So that's what cyberbullying is. So it's bullying, and it's another forum for it. That it's traditional bullying moved on.
Sure. And maybe we might just talk a little bit about the research that you conducted in this area. And I'm going to read out what Helena's research was conducted in. And it was using a new sociology of childhood to understand the relationship between teacher empathy and bullying among pupils. So you might just give us an insight to that and maybe talk about the key findings of your research.
Okay, yes. So basically I did a case study on a school, and we looked at the benefits of teacher empathy and how that can either, how it relates to bullying behaviour in the school, so how it can either exacerbate bullying behaviour or ameliorate bullying behaviour. So what the findings were that when teachers show empathy to the students, that then the students in turn will take on that behaviour also, and they will treat their peers with empathy. And obviously, if they're treating their classmates with empathy, and they're being kind to their classmates, well then it obviously lessens bullying behaviour. So empathy itself is very hard to define. So when I did my research, how I measured teachers' empathy was I used Davis's IRI scale. So it's a reactivity index, and he measures empathy under 4 different constructs. So the first being perspective taking, and that's a really good construct for teachers to have in order to have empathy in dealing with children in the classroom. So what it means is, if you have good perspective taking, is that you can subdue your own thoughts on the feeling and on the subject, and listen to the thoughts of the students and understand where they're coming from. So in the research that I did, that was really important also, because it was in a school that worked with children from low SES. Sure. So obviously they're coming from different cultural backgrounds to the teachers within the school. So it's really important for teachers within that school in particular to have good empathy and to understand where children are coming from culturally, and you know, what they're bringing to the school, where they're coming from themselves. So perspective taking is really important, and then there's also empathic concern is another construct. Personal distress, where you are upset when you see a child upset. So obviously with the teachers in the school, we don't want them scoring too high on personal distress. Sure. Because although it is an empathic construct, it's not very good for helping to tackle bullying situations, because teachers would be too upset to deal with it.
Sure. And I suppose, so what would help to tackle bullying situations? So what role does the parent and the teacher play here, and how did they go about promoting?
Well, I also looked at how teachers role model empathic behaviour. Okay, so and that's really important, that parents are good role models for their children too. So
how can they be good role models?
Yeah. So when we're talking online bullying, so you know, children are going to see what we do, and we, you know, as parents, we are our child's number one. We are the number one role model. So if you're on Facebook, which tends to be the medium that parents use more so than children 9 to 16 in Ireland, they're the biggest users of Instagram and Snapchat. So we share different spaces, but we're all online together. And so if parents even are you know, making negative remarks about celebrities, right. That's something that children will pick up on and can see, because they're obviously sometimes friends with their parents online. Sure. So that kind of behaviour. So really what we want to do is, you know, shut things down that are negative, and, you know, promote positive online experiences. So if parents can, you know, have cyber etiquette online, and, you know, sometimes when I give talks to parents in schools, and we put so much effort into rearing our children and preparing them for the world to be, you know, ready for society, and we want them to be good friends to each other, and we teach them what's right from wrong, and then at a certain stage or age in their life, we hand them access to the internet, and we haven't taught them anything about that. And we just say, here you go. You might have a few filters, or you might check in on them every now and again, but they're actually opened up not just to a playground that you're saying, off you go now, but to the whole world. So it's really important that parents have good conversations with their children about, because we want them to enjoy online, because that's where they live now.
Of course, and I suppose that's something that we're really grappling with in terms of the virtual world versus reality. And the norms online. And I suppose we have a shared responsibility around, I suppose, promoting digital resilience with our children. And maybe, Karen, just some of the research that you have conducted has looked at, I suppose, what children are feeling about when they're online in comparison to what their parents actually think that they're doing online. So you might just talk to us a little bit about that.
Like I think in the research that I did with the ISPCC and Vodafone, with 400 children from 6 to 18 across the country and 200 parents. We did it in 2017 and 2018. And I suppose there's a few things, like when you ask children and teens the question of, are there good things on the internet for people your age? They're kind of just looking at you going, why have you even asked me this question? Because it's their life, you know, and 68% of them say, yeah, absolutely, there's good things for people my age. So when you go to the parents, on the other hand, and you ask them what's worrying them, you know, 78% of them are worried that their child will give over information on the phone. You know, 78% are worried that a stranger might contact their kids. But underneath all of that, the parents are worried about their children's ability to cope with the ups and downs of life, which is resilience. So I think what we have to be careful in a way is to get ourselves into kind of, I'm going to say, some sort of cul-de-sac where we're fretting over, you know, what might happen to a child online, as opposed to holistic, the way Helena's talking there, holistic building of resilience for our children. But as part of that, the role modelling thing really struck me when you were saying it there, Helena, because what we find is, you know, children say, in general, these children and teens say they've got good relationships with their parents, and their parents listen to them, and they listen to their parents. So there's this lovely rosy picture painted, which is, I'm sure, true for the majority of these children. But then when you say to them, if something happened online, would you tell your parents? 40% say, never. I would never tell my parents of anything negative that happens to me online. So you have a situation where, yes, they trust their parents, but in this zone of online, they're not as sure, because the fear is that they'll take it away from me, particularly the young ones, if I tell them anything negative happens online. So there's very interesting contradictions going on here, where children, you know, do believe the internet is great, but negative things do happen. And then when they do happen, they're not telling their parents about it.
I think it's also important to say that negative things happen in a traditional sense for teenagers also.
Exactly.
And that's also something that they don't tell their parents.
No, exactly.
You know what I mean? So it's not just an online secret. You know, it happens traditionally too.
Absolutely. And even in bullying terms, like 68% or much higher levels will have had bullying offline experiences in the last year than online, or certainly than they'll report. So again, negative things, you know, in the same way as you don't go to the disco, if something bad happens, you're not going to tell your parent because they might let you go to the disco. So that's the dynamic of kids and parents to an extent.
So then I suppose if we just look at the research for a second, and why do we think then that 75% of parents haven't intervened in their children's online activity?
Okay.
So that seems like quite a significant finding.
Well, they actually say in the research that the reason they don't intervene is because there were a few different responses. So one of them was fear. So I fear what? I'm not sure, but that's what came out, fear. Also, technology, that they didn't understand how to use the devices, the apps that their children were using. Because as I said, research that ABC did in 2016 showed that parents are using different spaces to their children. So they're really the reasons why. And they don't also, if they don't have that technology, if they don't have that vocabulary, you can lose your child very quickly if you start having a conversation about, you know, on the internet kind of thing, you know, like you're going to lose your children. So that's the fear they have also.
That's really interesting. And I suppose, Liam, coming from a Vodafone perspective, and given that you're a global telecommunications service provider, like, what have you learned on that experience in terms of the pace at which technology has moved and trying to keep up with that? And like, what's your views on that in terms of how we can promote?
Well, so I think that point on the pace of technology change is very valid. Like when I joined the telecoms industry 25 years ago, the internet didn't exist. You know, and if you go back 10, 15 years ago, iPhones, tablets didn't exist. So I think for this generation, there's been a huge acceleration of technological advancement. what I would say is, if you could look back over the last couple of 100 years, every generation has some form of technological advancement, whether it was the invention of Morse code, the invention of radio, the invention of television. So I think every generation has the new technology to adapt to. I think every generation, especially the older one of us in those generations, tend to struggle to adapt to newer technologies. But I do think there's been a huge acceleration in the last number of years. We have over 500 million customers globally who use our technology every day to connect, to communicate, to do business, to entertain. And so we know it's a very powerful source of good. An awful lot of good things happen online, but we also know there are threats, right? And these are new threats like cyberbullying, and there's illegal content and other things that are vulnerable. And as a parent as well, with 2 kids around the age of like 11 and 14, I'm also personally concerned for what that world opens up to them. So, I think for us, this is a space that, we know we are part of the solution. I think it's a multifaceted solution. I think you see that represented today with even people on the panel. But we know that we have a role to help educate parents, and we have a global code of practice on child protection, which has a number of different facets. But one of the first facets is about actually education of both children and parents, to give them some of the tools and the knowledge and the expertise to be able to feel a little bit more comfortable having those conversations about the technology and what it is and how they can get involved with it, right through to sort of advocacy and supporting policy change at either a national or European level. And then making sure we put in place some of the things that you would expect in our network around controls, where we can give parents access to control content that they want to maybe limit and block for their children online.
And are they some of the initiatives that Vodafone has found has worked really well? And are there any other countries that you are active in promoting online safety in that you could share maybe some things that have worked well there as well?
We operate in 26 countries around the world and 12 countries in Europe, and the policy that we have on child protection is a global policy, so every country effectively adheres to the same global policy. I happen to be the owner of that policy in Ireland, so we do take the same approach in every country. And we have, for example, in Germany and in the Netherlands, we've ran a number of really successful programs actually using our own employees to go into schools to work on digital skills, to educate both teachers and children. We're very much of the view that we want to try and get as big an impact as we can with any effort or any work that we do. Sometimes getting to the children is fine, but sometimes actually you've limited scale and reach to get to as many children as you would like to get to. So one of the programs in particular in Germany focused on working with teachers as well, because if you can get to one teacher, you're getting to lots of different children over the course of their career in the education system. And that's something we're bringing back into Ireland now as well. We're actually putting more focus now in Ireland on parents rather than the school. We think actually there's probably a different activity that can happen in the school through government in particular to focus on the curriculum in school. We want to focus where we have an opportunity with parents to help educate them.
I suppose that probably, Aman, maybe from your perspective, you're going into schools as a youth ambassador in Webwise. And what sort of activities are you actually doing in the schools?
Well, some of the work that Webwise does, as you were saying about the bullying, is to report bullying when you see it online, and don't be a bystander, don't just ignore it, don't act like nothing happened, because a lot of people have normalized bullying that, as you said, like cyberbullying is just one bad comment online, and people think that one mean comment about someone's picture, profile picture, is just normal, that's like supposed to happen, but we have to be able to take a stand and say, no, that this is wrong, and report it. And also, in Webwise, when we go around the schools, we try and explore the topic of having a healthy online life. So when you are online, that you're not obsessed with it, that's not your life, that you're taking time as well off of it to actually do things in real life offline.
Sure, so it's striking that balance between your online activity and then what you're doing offline as well, which is something really that I think the panel here shares today. I suppose, John, just maybe to bring you in on the conversation, you're listening to our children here in Ireland, and maybe you could just share with us, what are our children saying? Are they contacting Childline and saying that they are being cyberbullied, that they have concerns around online safety issues? What are our children saying?
Well, just for those who don't know Childline in the audience, because I know it's an international audience, it's a unique service. We're very lucky to have it here in Ireland, because we've been talking about research. When you think about Childline, it's the only 24-hour active listening service that children can call us any time of the day with any reason at all, and we're there to listen. So it's a non-judgmental, non-directional service, primarily run by volunteers who are very well trained by a group of very well educated, compassionate and committed staff that I have here in Childline. I suppose most of the reasons we get calls for any reason whatsoever. I mean, today is National Exam Day. It's the Leaving Cert Day and the Junior Cert. So, you know, you look at the calls today, I suspect, of which we probably have about 500 or 600 calls already today, maybe 40 or 50 online chats. By the end of the day, we'll have received close to 1,200 calls for all reasons. And a lot of them would be the symptoms of issues. So they're ringing with worries or concerns. They don't ring and say, I'm ringing to talk about an online issue we're having here. It's, as you said earlier, that's their world. But if you dig deep, as our volunteers are well trained to do, and that trust is built with the child, you very definitely get grains of sand that are offline issues extended to online. So for instance, we had a call the other day, a 14-year-old girl who was bullied in the schoolyard. She had weight issues. She stopped going to school just to avoid it all. But the bullies caught up on her through her mobile phone and started sending pictures of skinny girls to her phone. And that's the sort of, you know, I always used to say, certainly when I was in school and many of us were in school, if you were being bullied, you could go home and hide in your bedroom. Now the bully gets into your bedroom with phones and tablets. And so we get a lot of calls every year with the effect. And everything that people have been talking about here today, from mobile phone bullying or bullying issues happening on mobile phones, to viewing of pornography, and just children and young people just not being able to assimilate or even digest what's happening. So it's a pretty scary world.
Sure, and I suppose it goes back to that resilience piece again, what the ISPCC and Childline are aiming to do around empowering children so that they can make the choices online as to what they do click or who they do accept a friend request from. And I think in some of your research, Karen, you talk about the stranger danger concept. So just maybe talk about that and maybe some of the harms that children are actually exposed to online that they're telling us they are.
Yeah, well, there's the two sides, because again, we have this question which we got back in the original Kids Online research.
Yes.
And this was the researchers back in 2011, and they invented this question of, you know, have you ever met somebody first online before meeting them face to face? And this was almost going to be a proxy for meeting strangers, you know, worrying strangers. And again, we look at it now and like 25% of the 6 to 18-year-olds say yes. 50% of those that are between 15 and 18 say yes, because that's the way people meet each other these days, quite often through friendship online groups before they meet in person. So it no longer is an indicator necessarily of bad things happening. It's just a new social norm. But there are worrying things in there in terms of, you know, again, we just ask people, do you come across, you know, violent and gory material? It's really high levels of, you know, 6 to 18-year-olds coming across that. You know, websites which are promoting unhealthy body image issues, you know, and actually giving people more ideas for how to become anorexic or bulimic. Issues about suicide, issues about... issues about, you know, drugs and sexuality as well. Again, it's hard to know from the research, which is why we need some more. You could be looking up a website about drugs to help yourself not educate, or because you're worried. So again, we've just to be conscious that our reading of things is not always what somebody's experiencing. But in terms of actual bullying, as Helena was saying earlier, there's people who are bullied in person and then online as well. And that's an amplifier then of already a negative experience going on for people. So meanwhile, there's very positive experiences going on. People are having a lot of positive social media. They're learning things online. They're on YouTube having a laugh and watching a video on the phone. So again, it's important for us as parents, I think, not to necessarily assume every interaction with the screen is a negative one, and not to necessarily have a crude view that screen time is bad time, and much as we have to also be careful of the quality of experiences people are having, and then obviously the way that they cope with them afterwards, even if they are in a slightly negative interaction with somebody.
And I suppose as researchers in this area, just screen time is very much a topic that parents discuss and talk about. It's something that children talk about. How long should my child at the age of 6 or 16 spend on screen time? So what's the answer to that?
I'm going to have to ask the developmental psychologist in the room, I'm afraid. I'm going to kick to that slightly. You know, they're learning all the time on it. Sure. They're learning all the time on it. And again, the reality is, it's probably not a good idea to spend 24 hours in front of a screen, but there are no more than the big screen. People used to say, I wouldn't let the television babysit my child, but there were some very good, Teletubbies or open, play school things. So I think it is just such a balance in the overall mix of any child's development, and it is an area where a lot of global research is still being done on the effects of screen on the brain and on social competences and things.
It is, but it's also, I think what the research is indicating is that it's not actually the length of time a child or a young person is spending online, it's more the quality of what it is that they're actually doing online. And therefore then the role that parents have to play in that, going back to intervening and understanding what children are doing online, and then obviously grappling with those privacy rights and respecting those rights that a young person has to do those things. So that's I suppose it's tricky from as a parent myself,
very tricky,
having those conversations and empowering a young person to have that conversation with, whether it's an adult, a responsible adult, be a carer or a teacher or whoever it is. So screen time seems to get a lot of airtime.
Yes.
And I think it still is something that there's a lot of questions to be answered. But I suppose, as I'm not sure who talks about it, but they talk about the digital diet and digital nutrition. And, as opposed to looking at how much is on your plate, look at what's on your plate. And maybe that's something from, I suppose, a screen time perspective that we could promote as well. And maybe, Geoffrey, just to bring you in with your legal background and the very special role that you have as the Special Rapporteur of Child Protection, we tend to think at times that the solution to all of our problems is bringing in a piece of law that will basically dictate what you must and shall not do. I suppose maybe you might just share with us your experience, not necessarily, well, I suppose from an Irish perspective, but also what's happening in the EU around how we're going to promote good laws and the importance of good laws.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I'm conscious of the fact that people here aren't just from Ireland, but my role is I am appointed to advise government on child protection issues in terms of the legislation in the area. I believe that the internet is the new child protection frontier. I also believe in what many of the other panellists have articulated, that there's some very strong positives that the internet can provide to children and young people. Some very strong supports that the internet can provide, whether it's in terms of children who are very vulnerable, such as children from the LGBT community, who are trying to access information, because I think it's a really powerful information tool. I believe that the law is only one part of the issue we should be looking at. I think far more important is the role of education. I'm a passionate believer in digital literacy. I believe that as a nation we need to do far more in terms of ensuring that our children are digitally literate. And how can that be done? I think we need to start thinking outside of the box. I absolutely agree with what John said, and I think he put his finger on a key issue. Is historically, when a child was bullied, the bullying stopped when the child went home. And that meant that there wasn't as much responsibility on parents. And I think the real challenge is for both schools and for parents. In terms of schools, I think far more needs to be done. And what I would suggest, in the child protection area, we have a designated liaison person in the school. I think there should be a designated person in each school throughout the country that will have responsibility for ensuring digital literacy in each school, because the solutions are sometimes local rather than global. But they are actually also global, because if this was replicated throughout the world, not just throughout the European Union, it would make a very real difference. Because what we need to do is we need to build up our children's resilience, because this is about resilience. It's making sure that our children are responsible when they interact with the net. And the other big issue is that recently I have been asked to act as an expert in an initiative which has been brought about by the European Parliament, which we'll all be familiar with recently, given the fact there have been new elections. And what the European Parliament has requested, it's requested new guidelines for judges, for prosecutors, and for law enforcement agencies. So I've been appointed as a children's rights expert to assist that process, and it has all of the key players internationally. I think that could be very useful, because I think we sometimes believe that the solutions are national. And there's been a lot of talk in this country about a digital safety commissioner. I believe, yes, that will be important, but it's not the only solution because of the fact that this is an area that knows no borders, that sometimes children are preyed on by perpetrators who are in other jurisdictions. And what we need to do is we need to ensure that we have proper solutions that cross those borders. And that's where I feel that we haven't stepped up to the plate to date. And I do believe the internet service providers have a key role, and that the answer to the challenges faced by the children and parents on the online world involves collaborating with the internet service providers. I'll give you an example. At the moment, the perpetrator can be anonymous online. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that those who prey on our children no longer remain anonymous. And I do believe the internet service providers have a key role in ensuring that, and also ensuring that victims get justice. And that's a key part. So I think if you ask me in summary, the two key issues that I believe are hugely important is the role of schools and the role of parents. And what we need to make sure is that our children are equipped, that they have the tools in the toolkit to deal with this huge challenge.
I suppose, Liam, that went to your point earlier that you were making about it's a multifaceted approach. Yep. And if we look at Australia maybe and some of the learnings from the Safety Commissioner there, that Australia obviously have come together in a collaborative way, taken an evidence-based approach and reached out to industry and academia and various partners and listened to parents and children. And specifically, Geoffrey, it just struck me when you made that point about digital literacy. It was one of the key starting points for them, was defining that and obviously collaborating with academia in order to do that. So I suppose, Liam, from your point of view, like globally, what Vodafone, you welcome those initiatives and.
Well, listen, I think I couldn't agree more with what Jeremy said in terms of this challenge that exists, and it's definitely multinational. It's not national. I think a lot of the platforms, the perpetrators that are maybe are potentially putting children at risk are operating from anywhere in the world, even outside of the EU. But it is multifaceted as well, and there is a balance between the right to privacy and the right to access and the right to security. And I think we sort of sit somewhere in the middle of that nexus as an internet service provider or as a telecommunications provider. So we don't control all the content that's on our network, for example. So we don't have an ability necessarily to validate someone's identity. However, there are state security obligations on us in the event of maybe a criminal prosecution where we can actually provide information which maybe takes away some of that anonymity, and maybe somebody who thinks they're anonymous actually may not be. And obviously some people go to great extents to hide that as well. So I think we do balance our state security, our security obligations versus our privacy obligations. I think it definitely requires a multinational global approach to this, and I think that's something that we definitely would welcome. We have been part of an organisation at a European level at least called the ICT Coalition for Children Online, which is an industry organisation which came together about probably 15, 20 years ago, setting up a series of code of practice and principles for operators and internet service providers to adhere to at a European level. And that's everything from making sure we make available to parents education tools to control access, that we take our reporting obligations and execute on those. We block illegal content. So we and over 20 other companies now are part of that European coalition. And actually we're currently working to create an Irish chapter, the first national chapter in Ireland in particular, to create that sort of national sense of a shared way of working. But obviously that's not on a legislative basis or on a legal basis. It is more voluntary. But I think it's multifaceted. It requires us to do our part in that. Definitely as parents, and I know this myself, I also have a role to play in both my healthy online behaviour and my children's online behaviour. I think, Helena, you spoke about role modelling. Yeah. I think it's something I'm very conscious of is that we as parents role model to our children as well what healthy behaviour is like. So it's hard to tell your children to put down their phone or their iPad if they see their parents on their phone or on their iPad. So in our household at least we try to have that conversation in balance as well.
So maybe just on that, Liam, if you don't mind me asking, coming into your household for a moment, what your healthy online behaviour with Ruby and Ben might look like.
Yeah, well, Ruby's 11 and Ben's 14, so it's been a very interesting conversation for the last number of years. I suppose as a parent, and this is not a Vodafone position, but as a parent, we've taken the decision to use some sort of tools that are out there to help set some boundaries or guardrails for our children on what they can do. So, they both have this app on their phone that I can control from my phone. So it sets time of day access, it sets many hours per day they can use, it sets some limitations on the types of sites that they can access and see, which sort of changes as they get older. Sometimes we do feel like we're being over-parenting, and sometimes I feel like should I be actually maybe just trusting my children to navigate their own way through this world, and I should help them do that? Or am I right to put in place these guardrails? But at the moment, the guardrails are sort of working for us.
Sure.
Now, as Ben gets older, it's becoming more of a challenge, because at least from what we hear, a lot of his peers don't have the same sort of controls. But we've managed to keep on this track for the moment, and it's working for us. I think Helena mentioned as well the importance of having healthy conversations with children about what they're doing online. And that's something that we work on particularly as well, is having that conversation, having an open collaborative conversation. What are they doing? What are they seeing? Who are they talking to? And just having a trusting conversation with them, as opposed to necessarily a fearful or hysterical conversation.
Yeah, and I suppose it's different for every parent, isn't it? And maybe, Karen, some of the research that you looked at, there were some rules, I suppose, that parents had implemented for their children.
And again,
an example of what some of those were.
Well, there's a couple of things here, and I hope the parents were being 100% candid in what they were talking about, because I think it's really hard for parents. Like, if you're asked on any aspect of your children, so do you feed your children healthily? Your reaction is yes. You come in with good parent answers, and I think that's understandably in all of us. But this research, which has asked these questions over the years, that said, which would hopefully take out that factor, because you'd still be looking at the patterns, you see that around 50% of parents say they've done something. And some of them are doing what Liam's doing with the parental controls.
Sure.
Most parents, actually higher, around 70%, are saying they do something-ish to keep an eye on online, but on how much time. But that could be anything from just, take that away, it's 2 a.m, to, you can only have half an hour. And again, there's age issues there, and there's specific children, particularly boys, with gaming. Like last year when I was doing this research, it was around the time of Fortnite. So parents were literally having to, strip these kids away from this Fortnite because of what was going on at the time. So they're trying to do different things, but I think the bigger point, which we've all been making as well, is parents don't always know what to do in this space. They don't really know, we don't really know what healthy online behaviour really looks like necessarily, and we don't really know how we should take our child from 4 to 18. But I think we need to try and learn amongst ourselves and within our individual families, and benefit from whatever shared learning we can all get here, because it's unfortunately the technology is moving faster than our learning curve. So we have to try and move into this space together, not sure, but trying and conscious and monitoring ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you,
To build on that point about research and add to Geoffrey's education, I think research, there isn't enough research done on this, and we're in one of the biggest seats of learning here. Education has to be good. Education has to be based on really solid research, and I don't think we've done enough of that at the moment. If you look at the research, you look at the education side of things. I mean, go back to all those road safety ads. The public awareness and education brought road safety to standards much, much higher and deaths lower. So I think there has to be a lot of public awareness around it. And then when you look at the education box, good research has to inform good education. So if you look at the space, we're contemplating and looking at it in the ISPCC at the moment. If you look at what's happening in schools, I think, Liam, you said earlier, 37 different types of education programs are happening in Ireland. I counted 24, so obviously I stopped counting too early. We don't want to be the 38th organisation to go in and teach something completely different. It has to be absolutely part of the curriculum, and there has to be one way of teaching and one way of now, somebody might disagree with that, because of course there are different ways of teaching. But if you go into the same school 38 times with different messages, it's just going to be lost. You're not going to get any traction on that. So, I mentioned earlier about Childline having 1,200 calls. We have a research omnibus every single day, and we need to make more use of that to inform really good policy, but also to inform education. And the sooner we get that done, I think the better. I think that's. If you look at the analogy of road safety, and that's kind of a good analogy in some ways.
Well, it is, because if you bring a child online, if we walk out of our house today as a young child, we know that crossing the road, we're looking at traffic lights, and we've green, red, and amber.
You could probably sing the Green Cross Code as we all could, but why not?
I don't want to show my age, John. I'm not going to sing the Green Cross.
I'll sing it for you.
Safe Cross Code. But like, we don't have a traffic light system online in that world.
Yeah.
So we're still trying to figure out, and there are norms, and some of the norms that have been accepted, they may not be the right norms that we have accepted that type of behaviour online. And I suppose, Geoffrey, you were going to come in on a point there when John was talking about the education piece.
Yeah, it's on the research piece.
Yeah.
Like, I strongly believe that, there's a huge deficit of research. And if we can take what we've been discussing over the last hour on screen time, I was reading a lot of material around how negative screen time was. We hear today that it depends on what a child is viewing rather than the length of time. So we see that there's a conflict in the research. So what I need to do, I suppose, I think as a citizen, is to promote the fact that we should have homegrown research. Because what we're doing is we need to look at Irish kids, our French kids, or really what are the issues that are emerging. I also think that the law hasn't kept pace with technology. And I think that it is a real red flag. And I think it's a challenging question. When should the law become involved, and when should we criminalise behaviour? Those are key questions, I suppose, that we need to ask. And the technology is moving so fast that what will happen, unless the law keeps pace with technology, is perpetrators will be allowed to prey on very vulnerable children. I think that's deeply regrettable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one of the areas as well, and maybe Helena, you might just have a view on it. You talked about what young people will be doing online, and I suppose digital well-being and the effects maybe on mental health. And so has any of your research looked at any of that?
Well, I was going to go back to the research we did for the survey of parents here today. And really what we did find was 86% of parents had spoken to their children online, which is what we encourage, which I think is the way forward. It's education, it's good communication. But also, what also came out of that same research was that although parents were talking to their children and they had safeguards in place, 45% of parents still felt like they weren't doing enough. So I think that's the biggest piece of information we've taken from that research, that although parents are listening, they're going to websites for advice, and they're listening to the media, and they're doing their own research online to keep their children safe. That's what we want. We want our children to enjoy online and keep them safe. As much as they're doing all of this, 45%, nearly half of parents, still are nervous about, have I done enough? Is my child safe? What content will they view? So, I think there needs to be.
But I suppose that leads to the question of, where do parents go to seek advice online? So I suppose
at the moment, they're again, unfortunately, they're confused where to go. And so our research would have shown over the last couple of years, they're going to friends and family, which unfortunately means we're getting 95 different versions. And they would like to go to what they regard as something evidence-based, that they could go, yes, this is approximately the amount of online, or the type of online, or the amount of parenting supports, or whatever that I should be using if my child is X age or X stage or X personality type. They feel a bit lost. And just to that point of Helena, they also, not only do they not feel comfortable that they themselves know, they wish government would do more. They wish online companies would do more. And I think if we'd written, they wish everyone would do more. Because actually we all wish everyone would do more, so that we had a kind of roadmap. And I think there's a real sense of we need more consolidated effort in this space, as well as more evidence to guide us.
It's the evidence-based approach, and it's the collaborative approach, and it's doing more together, because we all have that shared responsibility. I suppose, maybe I might just very briefly talk to you about, like, if you were supporting somebody who is experiencing cyberbullying, or you were giving advice to somebody who is experiencing cyberbullying, what advice would you give them?
I think the number one piece of advice I would give is communication. And yes, it can be so obvious that if something bad to you is happening, like not even online, just anywhere in life, that you go talk to someone about it and try to put an end to it. But for a lot of people, a lot of young people especially, the first thing is, like, they have loads of emotions rushing through their mind when someone is cyberbullying them, and that can be lots of shame, lots of guilt, lots of victim blaming. I think parents especially have to have empathy and realize that it is a very hard topic to talk about for kids going through it. And lots of parents can be disheartened to hear that their child's getting cyberbullied through a teacher telling them, or a friend telling them. But again, a lot of parents kind of think that the default response is to try and put an end to it straight away. But sometimes kids just want to have someone, like a shoulder to cry on, someone to just hear them first without actually trying to put an end to it, because that can be hard. If it's like your peer who is bullying you in school, there can be a lot of stigma around that, lots of labels. You don't want lots of people knowing about it. But parents can be very abrupt with how they try and deal with it and try to put an end to it. I think parents should understand that if your child is going through cyberbullying, sometimes they just want someone to listen to them. And I would think encourage young people to communicate with not just their parents, friends, teachers, anyone who they think is comforting for them. Just talk to them about it.
Yeah,
Of course.
and that's what empathy is. It's not about finding a solution.
Exactly.
It's about making a connection. So it's about having that good communication and that trust, because when someone is upset or being cyberbullied or upset in any way, what you want to feel is validated in your emotions, in how you feel, and you need somebody to hear how you're feeling and understand that. And that's half, that's going to ease the pain an awful lot. You're not looking for a solution. Okay, obviously a solution is great to come down the line, but you want to feel heard and you want to feel validated in your pain. So that's really important for parents to understand.
And interesting, isn't it? Because Childline's whole thing is active listening, and it's exactly what Childline does. And yet, when I did some research a few years ago, parents saw Childline as almost sometimes a threat to them. If my child has to talk to Childline, it's almost an insult to me. Whereas, something like Childline existing as an alternative source for active listening is fantastic. For
Which
parents
is really
and for all of us.
It's important for children in terms of building their resilience, because we don't want them to wait to pick up the phone when something is really wrong. We want them to pick up the phone at the earliest possible stage, so that they can build that confidence, and then they're empowered then, so that they can make the decision and behave in a particular way.
Maureen, I think, it's really important now that you're saying that when a child comes to a parent or a teacher or anybody, that there isn't the "oh my God" response, because that's when the child will stop talking. So we need to be able to understand and listen and get the context. If I go back to the black and white days, and I think about, if my mother read my diary, the things that she'd think about me, but half of it is made up, and what we have to just bear with children, and this is a stage they go through or a way they behave, and it can be quite shocking to us when we hear it first and we want to shut it down. But it's not about that. We have to listen to them and appreciate and value where they're at, and that they do have agency themselves. And they are in charge of themselves, and they're finding their own way, and we can't tell them what to do all of the time, but guide them.
Excellent. And I suppose just to wrap up, maybe if I could just ask each of you what you think is the single biggest challenge that we're going to face now when we're tackling this problem. Maybe I'll start with you, Liam.
Well, it's not. I think today, some of the people have said already, today wasn't about us having all the answers. It was about maybe having a conversation, and as was part of the objective was to start that conversation with the right people in the room. To me, I think probably the biggest challenge is keep doing that. I think make sure we bring all the different voices to the table: the voice of children, the voice of research, the voice of academia, the voice of people like ISPCC, and the voice of people like Geoffrey. I think understanding where we come from, the role we have to play, I think helps us all be more effective in what we want to do and how we actually become an effective part of the solution.
Excellent. Geoffrey?
Yeah, I think listen to those who are directly affected. I think sometimes we forget the voices of those children who are actually exploited. I think that's a key part. And the other key message that I'd like to articulate is peer-to-peer support. Children supporting children is hugely powerful. I think we need to do much more of that. And my final point is the theme of this afternoon's session is about parents. It was great to hear Liam talk about you supporting parents, because I think what is absent is a national strategy, not just for children, but for parents. Because parents have a key role in ensuring that their children stay safe online.
John?
Well, I don't have to embellish too much on the listening to children, which is fantastic to hear. Listen to them, believe them. But also from a policy perspective and what the ISPCC are trying to do, we've affected many things locally, and thankfully in Ireland you can get very close active participation of our members of our parliament, which is fantastic. But that's not going to fix it for us. So this is the one policy issue that I think the ISPCC is putting top of our agenda, and it has to be done by collaboration, and it has to be done by the sort of things that Geoffrey's getting involved, because it's a borderless issue. We can't just fix it in Ireland because it won't go away. So it has to be complete collaboration on a number of fronts. And I'm even talking to the other charities and agencies that are involved with child protection. If we get together, we can make a louder voice.
Excellent, John. Helena?
Yeah, and it is global, but it also starts at home, with the parents and with the children, and just with that good communication. And the Anti-Bullying Centre, we recommend a whole community approach to tackling bullying behaviour and online safety. So that involves parents, children and the school and the whole community. So everyone needs to be on the same page, basically. And it doesn't have to be a scary monster that we're afraid to tackle. It's just about baby steps and opening up those conversations.
Sure. Karen?
Yeah, for me, I just think we owe it to our children to start collaborating in this space. And, if we want them to grow up resilient, I think we can equip our children a lot, we can equip ourselves a lot as parents, teachers, and members of society. But I think we also need to have this ethical protection of the whole system, and I know that's really difficult because we're now, we're not nations anymore, we are pan-national. But, I think we can collectively take responsibility for trying to create that world in which each child and teenager can grow and develop to being amazing adults that then will demonstrate the empathy to the next generation. So we just get that lovely virtuous circle.
So it's
going.
not the here and now, it's future generations as well. And then the final words to you, Iman?
I think firstly is to have young people in the businesses, in the corporations, in the organizations who are trying to tackle cyberbullying. Second would be to listen to our voices and take us seriously and listen. And when we are saying something, we're really serious about it and we actually are passionate about it. Thirdly, I think would be to have young people, the faces representing the messages that the organizations want to imply. Like when it can sound very preachy when an older person is talking about cyberbullying to younger people. So to have a young person who can relate, like peer-to-peer teaching, raise awareness about the topics, it can sound more easier to digest. Yeah.
Excellent. I think we will be seeing a lot of you now into the future, Iman. I suppose just to wrap it up really and to thank everybody, that every member of the panel here today, our aim was to start a national conversation, and it is only the start of it. And I suppose our responsibility now is to continue that conversation and ensuring that when we are connecting for good, that we are connecting people in the digital world and that we are focusing and placing children at the centre of everything that we do, and also placing a greater emphasis on vulnerable children in that space. We all have a shared responsibility and a role to play, and I hope that in the future that we'll all continue to have this conversation in different forums, and hopefully some of the research will have benefited other people that are here today.